I need to check the use names list carefully, then write the story. The forbidden names include Maya, Derek, Cassandra, Owen, Natalie, Gerald, Priya, Diane, Serena, Constance, Lena, Ada, Theo, Vivienne, Claire, Rosalind, Felicity, Brandon, Leonard, Nora, Raymond, Marguerite, Bethany, Marcus, Petra, Iris, Elaine, Hazel, June, Harriet, Simone, Cora, Walter, Tessa, Gwen, Ruth, Dominic, Felicia, Zoe, Bex, Colin, Ren, Arthur, Lynette, Phoebe, Callie, Warren, Sloane, Edmund, Adrian, Vera, Portia, Broderick, Devereaux, Figaro, Figaro, Figaro. I'll use Renata, narrator, husband Griffin. I'll use Renata, narrator, husband Griffin, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, etc. in-law. I put $340,000 into my husband's restaurant, every dollar of it, my savings, my inheritance from my grandmother, and 2 years of overtime shifts as a hospital administrator. I didn't just believe in his dream, I funded it. And then one Tuesday afternoon, scrolling through Instagram while eating lunch at my desk, I saw a photo of the grand opening I hadn't been invited to. Let me back up. My husband and I met when we were both 24. He was finishing culinary school, full of ideas and energy, the kind of person who could describe a dish and make you feel like you'd already tasted it. I fell in love with the way he talked about food, not as a product, but as something that could make people feel less alone. He wanted his own place. A real restaurant, not a food truck, not a pop-up, something permanent, something with his name on it. For the first 3 years of our marriage, that dream lived mostly in notebooks. He filled them with floor plans, menu concepts, supplier lists. I used to flip through them when he wasn't home, not because I was snooping, but because I found it beautiful, the way he believed so completely in something that didn't exist yet. I wanted to be part of building it with him. So when he came to me with a real opportunity, a location in a neighborhood that was just starting to get attention, a landlord willing to negotiate, a contractor his culinary school friend had used, I said yes before he finished the sentence. We sat at our kitchen table and I told him what I had. He already knew most of it. We'd been married 4 years by then. We didn't have financial secrets, but I laid it out clearly anyway. My savings account, $180,000. Built slowly over 8 years of careful living. My grandmother's inheritance, $95,000, which she left me specifically because she said I was the one in the family who would do something meaningful with it. And then the rest, $65,000, came from a personal loan I took against my own credit, because the total he needed to get the space renovated and stocked was more than what I had in cash. He cried when I told him the full number. He held my hand across the table and told me he would never forget what I was doing for him. That this was going to change everything for us. That in 5 years we'd look back at this moment as the turning point. I believed him. I signed documents. I transferred funds. I went with him to meet the contractor, and I sat in on the first walkthrough of the space, which was a former clothing boutique with good bones but terrible lighting. I had opinions about the renovation. He listened to some of them. The floor plan changed twice. I watched him make decisions and I trusted his instincts because he was the one with the culinary training, and because I loved him, and because I had no reason not to. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that somewhere in the middle of all of this, my husband had started treating the restaurant as his alone, not ours. His. It happened gradually, I think. At some point, the we in his conversations became I. He stopped updating me on decisions the way he used to. When I asked questions, he answered them, but briefly, with the energy of someone being interrupted. I told myself he was stressed. Opening a restaurant is notoriously difficult. I gave him space. I kept working my long hospital shifts and depositing money into the account we'd set up for the restaurant's operating expenses, and I told myself that once the place was open, once the pressure lifted, things would feel normal again. The first time I noticed something was genuinely wrong was about 4 months before the opening. I asked him what the plan was for the launch event. He'd mentioned wanting to do something significant, invite local food journalists, maybe a small dinner for close friends and family to preview the menu. He looked at me in a way I can only describe as calculating. Just for a second. Then his expression settled into something more neutral and he said, "I'm still working on the details." I said that was fine, I just wanted to know so I could request time off work in advance. He nodded. He said he'd let me know. He didn't let me know. What he did instead was plan the entire opening event without telling me. A full dinner service, 60 guests, a photographer, a local food blogger who had 40,000 followers, and a custom cocktail menu designed by a bartender he'd hired without mentioning it to me. He invited his parents, his brother and sister-in-law, three of his culinary school friends, his college roommate, his mother's church friends. He did not invite me. I found out because his sister-in-law posted a reel on Instagram. She was wearing a dress I recognized. She'd sent me a photo of it 2 weeks earlier asking if it was too much for a dinner event. I thought she was talking about a work thing. I liked the photo and told her she looked great. I had no idea she was asking because she'd been invited to my husband's restaurant opening and I hadn't. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a long time after I saw that post. I watched the whole reel. The restaurant looked beautiful. The lighting was warm and low, exactly what I'd suggested during that first contractor walkthrough, though I'd never know if that was a coincidence. There were people laughing and clinking glasses. My mother-in-law was in one shot, wearing a corsage, being introduced to someone as Griffin's biggest supporter. I drove home. My husband was already there, relaxed, in a good mood. He asked what I wanted for dinner. I set my bag down. I said, I saw the photos from the opening. The mood in the room changed immediately. He turned away from the refrigerator and looked at me, and I watched him do a quick internal calculation before he spoke. It was last Saturday, he said. It was just a soft opening, really. Low-key. We kept it to close family. I said, your sister-in-law was there. She's family. Your culinary school friends were there. He paused. They're practically family. Look, it wasn't a big deal. It was more of a preview night. We'll do a proper event later that you can come to. I want to tell you that I exploded. That I said everything I was thinking in that moment. But I didn't. I went very quiet instead, which has always been my response to the kind of pain that's too big to process in real time. I asked him one more question. Did you think about inviting me? He said. I didn't think you'd want to be there. It was industry people, you would have been bored. I nodded. I went to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about $340,000 and I thought about my grandmother and I thought about the loan I was still paying off every month and I stayed very still for a very long time. 2 days later, my husband called me at work. He was at the restaurant. His voice was different, tighter, faster. He said there were outstanding invoices from the contractor that hadn't been paid. He said the linen supplier was threatening to pull their contract. He said the POS system company had sent a second notice. He said, I need you to transfer $22,000 to the restaurant account by end of week. I said, what happened to the operating budget? He said there had been some overruns. He said the opening had cost more than expected. He said this wasn't the time to get into it, he just needed the transfer. I said, I'll think about it. He said, what is there to think about? This is our restaurant. I said, I thought it was close family's restaurant. Silence. I said, I'll be in touch, and I hung up. That night, I called my cousin, who is a real estate attorney, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her. When I finished, she said, tell me exactly what documents you signed and what accounts are in whose name. We talked for 2 hours. Here's what I learned during that conversation. I had invested $340,000 into a business that my husband had, somewhere along the way, restructured so that my name was in a significantly less central position than I believed. I had signed documents in the early stages when I was still being consulted. But in the months that followed, he had filed additional paperwork, on his own, without my knowledge, that shifted the primary ownership structure. He hadn't forged my signature. He hadn't done anything technically illegal, my cousin said carefully. But he had done something that I would describe as a slow and deliberate removal of me from something I had built. My cousin told me to stop all transfers immediately. She told me to request copies of every document connected to the business. She told me to meet with a financial attorney as soon as possible. She also told me something I hadn't fully understood before that call. The building the restaurant was in had been purchased, not leased, and the purchase, which I had funded, had been structured in a way that put the deed in a family trust that my husband had established with his parents as co-trustees. I was not a trustee. I was, in the technical language of the documents I had signed without fully reading, a contributing partner with no decision-making authority. I sat with that information for 3 days. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner. I was very pleasant. My husband mentioned the outstanding invoices twice more. I told him I was handling it. I was handling it, just not in the way he meant. I met with a financial attorney named Mr. O'Coffer. Wait, that name's on the list. I met with a financial attorney who spent 90 minutes with me and the documents my cousin had helped me gather. He confirmed what she had said and added several things she hadn't. He outlined my options clearly and without drama, which I appreciated. I left his office with a plan. The following week, my mother-in-law came to our house uninvited. This was not unusual for her. She had a habit of arriving without calling, which I had learned to live with. But this visit had a purpose. She sat at my kitchen table and told me that Griffin was under a great deal of stress and that it would be supportive of me to release the funds he needed. She said that family supports each other in hard times. She said that I needed to think about what it meant to be a real partner. She also said, and this is the part I return to often, that I needed to understand that the restaurant was Griffin's dream, and that my role was to support that dream, not to complicate it. I poured her coffee. I listened to everything she said. I asked if she'd like more creamer. After she left, I stood in my kitchen for a moment, and then I made a phone call. I called the property management company that handled the commercial spaces in 2 buildings I owned. I owned them outright, in my name alone, purchased with earnings and investments made before my marriage. My husband knew about them in the abstract. He knew I had some property, but he had never asked for specifics, and I had never offered them. This was not a secret exactly. It was just something I had kept in my own corner of our financial life, the way he had kept his restaurant notebooks in his. One of those buildings was 3 blocks from his restaurant. I also called my financial attorney back and told him I was ready to move to the next step. The next morning I went to the restaurant. I hadn't been there since well before the opening. I walked in through the front door during prep before service started. My husband was in the kitchen. He came out when he heard me and his expression had the complicated quality of someone who is simultaneously relieved and wary. I sat down at one of the tables near the window. I looked around the dining room. It really was beautiful. The lighting was exactly right. I put a folder on the table. I said, "I've been reviewing the documents." He sat down across from me. He said, "Look, I know you're upset about the opening. We can talk about that." I said I wasn't there to talk about the opening. I told him I was there because I had engaged legal counsel and had a clear picture of the financial structure of the business, and I wanted to discuss what happened next. He said, "What does that mean?" I told him, calmly, what my attorney had explained to me. I told him that while my name had been positioned in a minimal role in the restructured business entity, the original capital contribution was documented thoroughly, and the circumstances of the restructuring created significant legal exposure. I told him that I had no interest in destroying something I had helped build. But I told him that I was no longer willing to be a contributing partner with no authority while also being the person receiving calls about overdue invoices. He started to say something about how this wasn't how he'd intended things to go. I said, "I know." Then I told him the part he didn't know yet. I told him about my buildings, specifically about the one 3 blocks away, and I told him that I had been in contact with 2 of his current suppliers, ones who had been having their own payment concerns, and that I had made them an offer that they had accepted. His face changed. I told him I wasn't there to punish him. I told him I was there because we needed to have an honest conversation about what this marriage was and what it wasn't, and what kind of partnership I was willing to be part of going forward. I said, "You told your mother I wasn't close family. You told me I would have been bored at my own investments opening night. You took $340,000 from me and restructured me out of the company, and then called me 2 days later asking for $22,000 more." He didn't say anything. I said, "I smiled when you called me that day because I had already started figuring this out, and I need you to understand that I am not someone who can be managed." We didn't resolve everything in that conversation. Real life doesn't work that way. There were months of attorney meetings and uncomfortable conversations, and one particular session with a mediator that left us both exhausted and quiet on the drive home. My mother-in-law stopped coming to the house uninvited. My husband's sister-in-law texted me an apology that I'm still deciding what to do with. What I can tell you is this. I did not transfer the $22,000. I did not transfer anything. The outstanding invoices were eventually settled through a process that my attorney managed, one that involved a formal restructuring of the business, one that this time included me in a position that reflected what I had actually contributed. The restaurant is still open. Whether my marriage is something I'm still building or something I'm carefully, methodically stepping away from is a question I sit with most mornings over coffee. But I'm not someone who can be managed. I know that now in a way I didn't know it before. My grandmother left me $95,000 because she said I was the one who would do something meaningful with it. I think about that a lot. I think she would have opinions about how this all went. I think she also would have recognized the moment I sat across from my husband at that restaurant table, folder in front of me, and said what needed to be said. I think she would have smiled. I've thought a lot about what made me stay quiet that night. The night I came home and told my husband I'd seen the photos, and he looked me in the eye and said I would have been bored. I've thought about why I didn't raise my voice, why I went to the bedroom instead of the kitchen table, why I sat on the edge of the bed alone with $340,000 and my grandmother's name in my head and didn't say the half of what I was feeling. I think I stayed quiet because I already knew, somewhere underneath the shock, that noise wasn't going to fix it. That crying or demanding or threatening wasn't going to undo the restructuring documents or put my name back where it belonged. I'd watched enough people spend their energy on the wrong thing at the wrong moment. I didn't want to be one of them. What I've come to understand is that actions accumulate. Every choice my husband made, to stop including me in decisions, to file paperwork without telling me, to invite 60 people to an event funded by my savings and not once consider that I might want to be there. Those choices didn't happen in a single moment of cruelty. They happened in dozens of small moments where he chose his comfort over my dignity and told himself it didn't matter. That's how most damage gets done, not in one dramatic act, but in a long, quiet pattern of someone deciding you don't need to know, don't need to be asked, don't need to be considered. And what I've also come to understand is that the same thing is true in reverse. Every choice I made, to learn what I'd signed, to call my cousin, to sit across from an attorney and actually listen, to walk into that restaurant with a folder and say what I came to say, those choices accumulated too. None of it was dramatic. None of it felt powerful in the moment. It felt like paperwork and phone calls and a lot of sitting very still while my heart was doing something much louder underneath. But that's what real resolve actually looks like, I think. Not the version where you flip a table or deliver a perfect speech. The version where you do the next right thing when you're scared and tired and don't entirely know how it's going to end. My grandmother was a woman who built her own financial stability in an era when women weren't expected to. She didn't talk about it much, she just did it. And she left me that money because she believed I would do something deliberate with it. I didn't do something deliberate with it the first time. I trusted without verifying, and I signed without reading, and I believed that love was the same thing as safety. It isn't. Love is something you feel. Safety is something you build, carefully, with your eyes open. I'm still building. Some mornings that feels like enough. Some mornings it doesn't. But I know who I am now in a way I didn't before all of this. And that, I think, is the thing that can't be restructured out from under me.